Hello, my name's Josh Mahony, Chief Market Analyst at Scope Markets. We have seen the announcement now that the SEC has approved all 11 spot Bitcoin ETF products. We're expecting them to open trading on Thursday. And so I wanted to give you an update on how I see things from a wider perspective, what this might mean for the market, and how things are shaping up as we move into a massive year that is 2024 when it comes to cryptocurrencies. First and foremost, of course, this is a massive deal because it is the first time that we can really see Wall Street money pouring into cryptocurrencies. Of course, we've had the likes of MicroStrategy and alike in the past that have given you access to potential Bitcoin exposure. But really, this does point towards a move from those big banks, the likes of JP Morgan, that have underwritten one of the assets, the likes of BlackRock that's providing one of the ETFs. All of a sudden, we've got a vested interest from Wall Street in cryptocurrencies doing well. And that can be a good thing in terms of holding cryptocurrencies. Is it going to limit the volatility that we have been seeing and the sort of manipulation that we've seen in terms of the price over the years? That remains to be seen. But certainly that entry of Wall Street money into an asset that is only going to be limited in terms of its supply over time, that's going to be really key. Now, bear in mind, 93% of all Bitcoin that is going to be mined has already been mined. So that expansion in terms of supply is unlikely to keep up with the expansion in terms of demand as we see Wall Street money really flowing into this asset class. We have heard from Bloomberg, they're speculating that day one on Thursday, that is likely to see $4 billion of inflows into the ETFs on day one, 2 billion of which could be simply from the BlackRock product itself. So certainly Thursday's trade is going to be absolutely key as we look out for that demand from the likes of the big banks, as we see demand from the likes of investors over in the US in particular. And what does this mean in terms of demand going forward? It's also worth bearing in mind that we have heard recently in the lead up to this announcement from Valkyrie, who have essentially said that if they get their Bitcoin ETF approved, then there's a good chance they push for an ETH and a Ripple ETF. So again, we could see that same run up in terms of those assets and potential outperformance. Again, that's something I'm going to be taking a look at. Let's take a look at my chart first and foremost. In terms of the near-term price action, we have seen Bitcoin outperforming following this announcement. A couple of things worth noting. Many people online have been calling for this to be a buy the rumor, sell the fact event, and they were expecting this market to really roll over in a meaningful manner. That hasn't happened thus far. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the coming days, but so far, this has been an overwhelming success as we head into the evening. Bear in mind that we did see that sort of fake tweet from the SEC, and that pointed towards an initial approval and then a rejection candle once we saw this essentially announcement, rebuffed by the SEC. Bearing in mind that that essentially pointed towards a possibility of something similar happening once we did see the official announcement, that initial rally and then the sell-off. It was like, is that a blueprint for what's going to happen when we do see an announcement? Thus far, that hasn't happened. We have seen consistent upside thus far, but of course, it's early doors at the moment. Let me just show you the wider, bigger picture in terms of Bitcoin, and the cyclical analysis that I have here really does point towards a market that has been remarkably consistent over the years. And that points towards three distinct phases, really centered around these halving events. The halving event, of course, is the moment where the algorithmic power required to create a Bitcoin is doubled. So it becomes double as difficult to be able to mine a Bitcoin. In the past, that has essentially marked the beginning of the big bull run, and lasts generally around about a year. Now, let me just see it on the monthly time frame so you can see exactly these times. So we've got 12 bars leading into this halving there, and then 13 bars either. So it's almost like the run up to it generally lasts a year. The post halving event generally lasts about a year, and then we see this pullback. So generally we see a strong period and a basing period for roughly a year to a year and a half leading into the halving event. Now, we're seeing exactly the same here. the halving event is happening on the sort of in March, April time, and 17 bars is what's counted. So 17 months leading into April halving event. At the moment, we're seeing price rallying up into the 61.8 Fibonacci retracement level. In the past, we have seen this area mark the peak prior to the halving. So we don't generally see price break through that prior high until we see the halving event happen. That's likely why many people have called for this to be a buy the rumor, sell the fact event, because essentially in the past, we haven't seen it push up and through the prior high before the halving event. We generally see it either rally into the 61.8 and then falter, as we've seen here, or we see it sort of rally into that peak. We don't generally see it hit that peak as early as we are at the moment, because we're still a few months away from that halving event. But of course, this announcement in terms of the ETF approval from the SEC could change things. You know, this time around, we might actually front run it, and you never know, we could see that push up into highs prior to the halving event. Time will tell, but certainly in terms of the sort of setup leading into this halving event, it does look like things are looking relatively favorable for this asset as we head into this post-halving period that historically has given us massive gains. You're talking about almost 10,000% that we saw back in 2013, sort of 2,800 here in 2017, and then 600% back in 2021 time. So you're talking about a normalization of this post-halving period of strength. But nonetheless, you're talking about overwhelming upside for this asset class that has over the years gained substantially. And in terms of what's happening at the moment, you would have to say that the things that are happening in terms of financial markets, in terms of potential rate cuts for this year and for the halving event, and this introduction of Wall Street money coming into the asset class, it does point towards the possibility of further strength going forward. But I alluded to the fact that we had heard from Valkyrie that they could potentially enact or put forward a XRP or ETH ETF. And so it raises questions about, is Bitcoin going to outperform the others in the class, or are we going to see it underperform? Now, bear in mind that from a historical perspective, and this is the monthly chart of the top period, top part of this chart is Bitcoin dominance. This is pointing towards how much strength it has in comparison to the rest of the crypto market. And generally, of course, in the past, we've seen, you know, massive strength in terms of Bitcoin compared to the smaller caps. Then those altcoins have a strong run, typically at the back end of the sort of post-halving bull run. You'll see those altcoins really outperform. And then during that sell-off that we see within markets, we then start to see Bitcoin regaining dominance as we see that move into the halving event. And generally that strength will then falter once again as the market sells off. Now we're seeing Bitcoin coming back into dominance. So this means that essentially Bitcoin is outperforming those other smaller crypto assets. And then at some point down the line, and typically what we see here is that you'll see it, you know, roughly around about, you know, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 months after the halving event, you'll start to see that Bitcoin dominance dropping off as those altcoins really see their run up. Are we going to see that happen this time around? Are we going to see Bitcoin dominance continue to push higher or flatline? That's something worth noting. Now, the question marks around what's happening in terms of ETH, what's happening in terms of XRP, that's going to be really key. And if I show you it here on the sort of shorter time frame, what we can see here is that the relationship between ETH and the relationship between ETH and Bitcoin and XRP and Bitcoin has favored strength in terms of ETH and Ripple over Bitcoin. So of course, we're seeing this announcement coming in favor of Bitcoin, but you're seeing relative strength in terms of ETH and XRP. That points towards the potential for outperformance for both of them if we suddenly start to see this story really shift in favor of potential ETF products for those two assets. We could see outperformance for those two. And you can see here also on the near term, whilst we have been seeing Bitcoin strength coming into play following this announcement, we're seeing market dominance decline. So you're seeing greater strength from those other assets, partly down to what's happening in terms of ETH and XRP, but also those more volatile crypto assets are now being given a sort of vote of approval that it seems like people are feeling more confident about the crypto space as a whole. Does that mean that this market dominance that we have been seeing building for Bitcoin over the smaller assets is over? I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the case as things stand. Of course, as we've seen in the past, generally we see strength coming into the halving event. And then we see, whilst we see some jitters, generally it holds up relatively well for some time before we then see that money really flooding into those sort of late rallies in the altcoins. But ETH XRP, certainly worth watching out for the possibility of some announcements that we could see similar products being proposed for these two assets, as we have seen rumors of in the lead up to this Bitcoin ETF. If we do see those tabled, then you're likely to see some speculative money coming into those assets. And as we've seen in early doors price action, that decline in market dominance comes as we see money coming into ETH, money coming into Ripple, as the expectation or growing expectation of a potential product for those assets does start to build. All in all, this has been a massive announcement, widely speculated that it was going to be approved, but thus far it doesn't appear to be a case of buy the rumor, sell the fact. Let's see how things play out over the coming days. But certainly in terms of the supply demand dynamics, even if we were to see a pullback or we see some sort of hesitation into this halving event, it does appear to be the case that with a relatively limited supply of Bitcoin in circulation, the opportunity for Wall Street money to flood into this market does provide the basis for a potentially strong 2024 in terms of Bitcoin and in terms of some of those smaller assets. Keep an eye out in particular for XRP and ETH and the potential for an ETF product being proposed for those and what it might do in terms of sentiment going forward.